VIP woman throws food at black waitress. Not knowing her employer was the mafia boss. The air in the upscale restaurant was thick with tension, and the hum of chatter filled the space as elegantly dressed guests indulged in their extravagant meals. The silver clink of fine wine glasses, the soft rustle of silk and velvet, and the warm golden lighting cast a serene ambience that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to disrupt the calm. And then, it happened. At the far end of the dining hall, a VIP woman, well known in the city for her sharp tongue and even sharper wit, suddenly rose from her seat. The sound of her chair scraping the floor was sharp and cutting, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. She stood, her eyes locked on a young black waitress, who had just brought a freshly plated dish to her table. The woman's voice cut through the hum of conversation, laced with disdain. "Is this supposed to be food?" she sneered, her words dripping with contempt. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes but a smile that never seemed to fade, stood frozen for a moment. She had seen rude guests before, but something about this woman felt different. Before she could respond, the VIP woman grabbed the plate with one hand and, in one swift motion, threw it, scattering food across the floor. The room fell silent, save for the faint sound of the dish shattering. The waitress flinched, her heart racing, but she didn't move. She had been trained to endure, trained to keep her head down, to never let the hurt show. But the humiliation stung deep. The guests around them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, many of them averting their eyes, unwilling to get involved. The VIP woman turned her attention to the waitress, her expression twisted in disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she spat, her voice rising. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The young waitress swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She had worked so hard for this job, sacrificing her time, her energy, all for the chance to work in a place like this. She had been invisible for years, blending into the background of the world around her, always trying to stay out of the way, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But today, the world had noticed her, and not in the way she had hoped. The moment stretched on, heavy with the weight of the VIP woman's words. The waitress's hands trembled slightly as she stood there, the shards of broken porcelain at her feet like a reflection of her shattered dignity. But just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected happened. From across the room, a calm voice cut through the noise. "Is there a problem here?" The voice belonged to none other than the mafia boss himself, a figure who had been sitting quietly in the back corner of the restaurant, his presence commanding but unspoken. His eyes, dark and unwavering, locked onto the scene unfolding before him. He had been watching the entire exchange in silence, but now, his words rang out with authority. The room seemed to hold its breath as the mafia boss stood, his massive frame towering over the diners. His reputation preceded him. No one in this room was unaware of who he was. As he walked toward the table, the atmosphere shifted. The guests, who had once been too afraid to intervene, now looked on with a mixture of fear and awe. The VIP woman turned to face him, her expression faltering as she saw the cold, calculating look in his eyes. "What seems to be the problem?" the mafia boss asked again, his voice smooth, but edged with an unmistakable threat. The VIP woman opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat as she realized who she was facing. She had no idea that the seemingly harmless waitress she had just humiliated was in fact under the protection of one of the most powerful men in the city. And the consequences of her actions would soon become painfully clear. The restaurant fell into a tense silence as the mafia boss stood, his towering presence commanding the room. The guests were frozen in place, unsure of what would happen next. The VIP woman, who had thrown the food, now realized the gravity of her situation. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The mafia boss approached her table with slow, deliberate steps. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and unyielding. Every step he took seemed to weigh heavily on the atmosphere, adding pressure to the already tense situation. The VIP woman, who had been so confident in her actions moments ago, now found herself shrinking under his gaze. "You know who I am, don't you?" the mafia boss asked, his voice smooth but laced with an undeniable edge. The woman's face turned pale as she stammered. I had no idea." Her voice trailed off, the realization of her mistake sinking in. "You never bothered to ask," he continued, his tone unwavering. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is what happens next. He stood before her, his massive form casting a shadow over the table. His eyes flicked to the young waitress, who was still standing motionless, her hands trembling at her sides. She had been caught in the middle of this storm, but now, she was the reason it was all about to change. Apologize, the Mafia boss said, his gaze fixed on the VIP woman. Apologize to her, and I'll let this go. The woman opened her mouth to protest, but the words died in her throat as the Mafia boss took a step closer, his expression hardening. He was not asking. He was commanding. Do it now, he said, his voice low and menacing. Slowly, the VIP woman's shoulders slumped in defeat. She knew she had no choice. Her pride had been shattered, and she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. I'm sorry, she muttered, her voice barely audible. I was wrong. The young waitress, still standing motionless, looked up at her with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had never expected this, never imagined that something like this would happen. But even as the words of apology left the VIP woman's lips, the Mafia boss was not done. You think an apology will be enough? He asked, his voice colder than before. You think that throwing food at her and humiliating her in front of everyone is something that can just be swept under the rug? The woman's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized her mistake. She had underestimated the power of the man she had so carelessly offended. I'm not here to lecture you, the Mafia boss continued, his eyes narrowing. I'm here to make sure this never happens again. He turned to the young waitress, his expression softening slightly. You're not just a waitress, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You are a person, and you deserve respect. No one should ever treat you like that. The waitress blinked, her heart racing as the words sank in. She had never felt seen like this before. The Mafia boss wasn't just defending her. He was giving her a voice, something she had never had in the eyes of those who saw her only as a servant. From this moment on, the Mafia boss said, his tone commanding yet filled with a strange sense of warmth. You'll no longer be working for this establishment. You'll be working for me. The room was silent, the guests exchanging confused glances. The VIP woman, still reeling from the events unfolding, could barely comprehend what had just happened. The Mafia boss was offering the waitress a way out, an opportunity she never imagined possible. I'll make sure you're taken care of, he added, his gaze never leaving the young woman. Your life is about to change. The waitress stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. This was too much to process all at once. Just moments ago, she had been humiliated in front of strangers, treated like she was nothing. Now, she was being offered a future she had never dared to dream of. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. The Mafia boss gave her a nod, and with that, he turned to leave. As for you, he said, his voice hardening as he addressed the VIP woman one last time. Consider this a lesson. Never underestimate someone just because of the job they do. With that, he left the room, leaving the stunned silence to echo in his wake. The VIP woman, now humiliated beyond words, sank back into her seat, knowing that her life had just been turned upside down. The guests slowly began to murmur, some in disbelief, others in awe of the power and influence the Mafia boss wielded. And as for the young waitress, she stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. Her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined, and as she glanced around the room, she couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of hope. The next day, everything had changed. The young waitress, whose name was Jasmine, stood in the luxurious penthouse apartment of the Mafia boss, Dominic Romano. She couldn't quite believe how quickly her life had shifted, from serving food at a high-end restaurant to now sitting in a place that felt like a world apart. The room around her was adorned with expensive furniture, rich velvet curtains, and crystal chandeliers that glimmered in the soft light. She had always been invisible, a shadow in the background. Now, she was in the spotlight, and she had no idea how to navigate this new world. Dominic stood by the window, his back to her, watching the skyline of the city with his usual air of power. He hadn't said much since they arrived, and Jasmine wasn't sure what to make of it. She had spent most of her life fighting to survive, working tirelessly just to get by, never once imagining that someone like Dominic, a man with enough power to change everything, would even notice her. She wasn't sure if she should feel grateful or scared. Do you know why I brought you here? Dominic's voice broke through the silence, smooth but laced with a quiet authority. Jasmine swallowed, unsure of what to say. I'm not sure, sir, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to face her, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. It's because you showed me something yesterday, he said. You showed me that sometimes, the people we least expect have more strength than we could ever imagine. Jasmine's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. I don't understand, she said softly. You were humiliated, treated like you didn't matter, and yet you stood there. You didn't back down. That's why I'm giving you this opportunity. Dominic walked toward her, his footsteps deliberate, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. I can give you more than just a job. I can give you a life. A life where you're not just a maid, not just a waitress. A life where you're someone who matters. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard words like that before. No one had ever treated her like she was important. Her whole life, she had been nothing but a servant, invisible to those around her, doing what she had to just to survive. But now, standing in front of Dominic Romano, she felt like she might have a chance at something more. But why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to reveal something personal. Finally, he spoke. Because I don't believe in people like you being treated as less than. And because, for the first time, I saw someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for themselves, even when it seemed hopeless. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She had never allowed herself to cry, never allowed anyone to see her vulnerability. But Dominic's words were breaking down the walls she had spent years building. I'm not sure what to say, she admitted, her voice shaky. Dominic smiled slightly, a rare, almost warm expression. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to prove anything. Just know that from now on, you don't have to live in the shadows. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jasmine allowed herself to believe that there might be something better waiting for her. She had always accepted her life for what it was, always thought that there was no way out. But Dominic's offer felt like a lifeline, something she hadn't known she needed until now. Thank you, she said softly, still in disbelief. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to thank you. Dominic nodded, his expression unreadable. You don't need to thank me. This is about you. It's about your future, and I'm offering you a chance to take control of it. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had never been given a choice before, never been offered something that could change the course of her life. And now, it was all in her hands. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. Dominic's offer was more than just a job. It was a chance to be someone. A chance to live a life that was her own, not defined by the expectations of others. I don't know what the future holds, Jasmine said, looking up at Dominic, but I'm willing to try. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, and then he gave a small, approving nod. Good. That's all I need to hear. Jasmine felt a surge of emotion well up inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. She felt like she mattered. And as she stood in that room, surrounded by wealth and power, she knew her life was about to change forever. The past had been painful, filled with struggles and sacrifices, but the future? The future was hers to write. And no one, not even someone as powerful as Dominic Romano, could take that away from her. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Jasmine. She had been living a life of anonymity, working tirelessly just to get by, but now, everything had changed. Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, had given her a chance, an opportunity to leave behind her past, and step into a future she had never imagined. As she sat in the car with Dominic, heading to one of his many properties, she couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. She had never been in a car like this before, sleek, black, with tinted windows that shielded them from the outside world. The engine purred smoothly, and as the city streets passed by, Jasmine's mind raced. She had no idea what to expect from this new life, but part of her was eager to embrace it. Dominic glanced over at her, sensing her nervousness. You're thinking too much, he said softly, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of authority. Relax. This is a new beginning for you, not a trap. Jasmine nodded, though she wasn't sure how to feel. The weight of the decision she had made was still settling in her mind. She had spent so many years just surviving, never imagining that someone would offer her a chance to truly change her life. She had always been the one in the background, invisible to the world, but now she was standing in the spotlight. As the car pulled into the driveway of a grand estate, Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like it before. The sprawling grounds, the perfectly manicured gardens, the towering columns of the house. It looked like something out of a movie, and for a moment, she felt like she didn't belong. But Dominic seemed completely at ease. "This is your new home," he said, stepping out of the car and holding the door open for her. "You can relax here. No one will treat you like you're invisible again." Jasmine hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. She had been taught to be wary of anything that seemed too good to be true, but the kindness in Dominic's voice made it hard to resist. He led her inside, and as they entered the house, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The interior was just as magnificent as the outside. Marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like stars, and walls lined with artwork that could have belonged in a museum. "It's all yours now," Dominic said, his tone steady as he walked with her through the rooms. "You can do whatever you want here. No one will judge you." Jasmine glanced around, her eyes wide. She had never imagined that something like this could be hers. She had always been taught to know her place, to stay in the background and never make waves. But now, she was standing in a mansion, a world away from the cramped apartment she had once called home. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, still in disbelief. "You don't have to say anything," Dominic replied, his voice softening. "Just take it all in. This is your new reality." As he spoke, Jasmine felt something stirring inside her, a sense of empowerment she had never known before. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was just a servant, just someone to be overlooked. She was someone who mattered. She could see it in Dominic's eyes, the respect he had for her, the way he believed in her. It was all so overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't just being given a new home, she was being given a new life. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Dominic turned to look at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he gave a small nod. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "This is just the beginning. From now on, you're not just a waitress or a maid. You're someone who has a future." Jasmine looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the chance to choose her own path. As they continued to walk through the house, Jasmine couldn't help but imagine the possibilities. She had been stuck in a life where she was constantly overlooked, constantly told what to do, constantly made to feel like she didn't matter. But now, she had the power to shape her own future. She wasn't sure what role Dominic played in all of this, whether he was simply offering her a job or something more, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to take this chance. She had never felt more alive, more hopeful, than she did in that moment. "You've made the right choice," Dominic said, as if reading her thoughts. "I believe in you." Jasmine nodded, her heart racing. "I won't let you down." Dominic gave her a small, approving smile. "I know you won't." And just like that, Jasmine knew her life had changed forever. This was the start of something new, something she had never imagined possible. And with Dominic Romano by her side, she knew she would never be invisible again. Jasmine stood in front of the full-length mirror in her new bedroom, still trying to process everything. The room was lavish, decorated in rich shades of gold and deep burgundy, with a canopy bed so grand that it seemed like something out of a fairy tale. She had never imagined anything like this, not in her wildest dreams. Her entire life had been about surviving, and now she was living in a place that spoke of wealth, power, and luxury. It felt surreal, but it also felt like an opportunity she couldn't afford to waste. Dominic had given her this chance, and she would make sure to prove she was worthy of it. He had been right when he said her life would never be the same. The maid's uniform she had worn just days ago now felt like a distant memory, replaced by tailored dresses, polished shoes, and the realization that she was no longer invisible. Her mind kept drifting back to that day, the one that had started it all. The day she had been humiliated by the VIP woman, the moment when Dominic had stepped in and changed the course of her life forever. What she had thought was a random act of kindness had, in fact, been a catalyst for something much bigger. She didn't know how to thank him, How do you thank someone for giving you a life you never thought was possible? She had been a ghost before, moving through life without anyone seeing her. But now she was someone. She was someone in his world. But as she thought about it, something nagged at her. She was grateful, of course, but part of her wondered if this was all too good to be true. Was she really meant for this world? She wasn't sure if she could ever completely shake the feeling that she was still that girl from the restaurant. Unworthy, insignificant. Just as her thoughts began to spiral, she heard a knock at the door. It was Dominic, looking as composed as ever in his sharp suit. He had always carried himself with an air of command, but today, he seemed more approachable. "Are you ready?" he asked, his deep voice pulling her from her thoughts. "Ready for what?" Jasmine asked, a little confused. Dominic smiled faintly. "To meet the people who can help you make your mark." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't even realized there was more to this life he was offering her than just the luxury of a new home. "I think you're ready," he added, his eyes scanning her as if he was seeing something new in her. "There's a lot more for you here than just a place to stay. I want you to be part of something bigger, something you never thought possible." His words sent a thrill through her, excitement mixed with fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but feeling a rush of emotions. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You're not just here to be safe or comfortable. You're here because I believe you have something in you that's worth more than what the world has let you see. It's time for you to step up, to take control of your life in ways you never imagined." Jasmine nodded slowly, trying to absorb his words. She wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but something about it felt different. This wasn't just about the mansion or the clothes. This was about power, control, and a chance to prove herself. Dominic seemed to sense her hesitation. "I'm not saying it will be easy. There will be challenges. But I'll be here, helping you along the way." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "You'll learn what it means to be respected. You'll learn what it means to never back down. And I'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed." Jasmine didn't know what to say. She had never been given an opportunity like this, and she wasn't sure if she could live up to Dominic's expectations. But something deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years, began to rise. A spark of ambition. A desire to not just survive, but thrive. She wasn't going to waste this. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Dominic nodded, satisfied with her answer. "Good. Let's go. Your new life starts now." As they walked through the grand halls of the mansion, Jasmine's mind raced. She had been given a chance to reinvent herself, to step into a world where she wasn't invisible. But with that came responsibility, expectations, and a world full of people who might see her as nothing more than an outsider. She couldn't afford to let that define her. Not anymore. The world she was about to enter was filled with power, intrigue, and danger. She had no idea what it would take to succeed, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the chance to fight for something real. As they approached the door to the meeting room, Jasmine's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment where she would make her mark. Dominic opened the door, and she followed him inside. The room was filled with a group of well-dressed individuals, all with the air of influence. Their eyes turned to her as she entered, but this time, Jasmine didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She was ready to take her place in this new world. Dominic introduced her with the same confidence he always had, but this time, something was different. Jasmine stood tall, her head high, ready to prove herself. The life she had once dreamed of was finally within reach, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. Jasmine stepped into the meeting room, her heart pounding in her chest. The people seated around the large conference table were a mix of powerful figures from various sectors: businessmen, financiers, even a few members of Dominic's trusted circle. They all looked at her as she entered, but Jasmine didn't shrink back. For the first time in her life, she held her head high, matching their gaze. This wasn't the same young woman who had walked into Dominic's world just days ago. She was someone new, someone different. Dominic walked in behind her, his presence filling the room. He didn't say a word, but the way the group stood in acknowledgement said everything. As the door closed behind them, he gestured for Jasmine to take a seat. She did, at the head of the table, right next to him. The murmurs in the room quieted as everyone found their seats. Jasmine felt the weight of the moment, but she knew she had to stay composed. This was her chance to prove that she belonged here. Dominic looked around the table, his eyes scanning the room. "This is Jasmine," he said calmly, his voice steady but carrying authority. "She's here to take on a role that will change everything. I'm giving her the opportunity to lead a new project that will shake up the game." The room fell silent. Jasmine could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but this time, she wasn't intimidated. She wasn't the invisible woman in the background anymore. She was in the spotlight, and she was going to make her mark. One of the men at the table, a tall figure with sharp features, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Dominic," he said, his voice skeptical, "she's just a waitress. I'm not sure she's ready to handle something like this." Jasmine's pulse quickened, but she didn't let it show. She knew what they were thinking. This was too much, too soon. But they didn't know what she had inside her. They didn't know her determination, her drive. "She's more than a waitress," Dominic replied without hesitation. "She's someone who understands the value of hard work, someone who knows what it means to fight for what you want. That's why she's here." The man across from them raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but before he could respond, Dominic's tone grew firmer. "Jasmine has the kind of resilience that most people can only dream of. That's why I trust her. And that's why you should too." Jasmine could feel the weight of the room shift as Dominic's words settled in. She wasn't just here because of him. She was here because she had earned it. She had fought for this, and she wasn't about to let anyone doubt her. "Thank you, Dominic," she said, her voice steady but full of purpose. "I may not have the experience some of you think I need, but I have something that matters more. I have the drive to succeed, and I won't stop until I do." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension palpable. Then, slowly, the others around the table began to nod, acknowledging her confidence. Dominic gave her a small smile, the first real smile he'd shown her since she had walked into his world. "That's exactly why I'm giving you this chance," he said. "Now let's talk business." As the meeting progressed, Jasmine listened intently, absorbing everything she could. The conversation shifted from business deals to strategy, and she took notes, her mind working at full speed. It was overwhelming, but she knew she could handle it. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had the power to change her own future. When the meeting ended, Dominic stood and walked over to her, a satisfied look on his face. "You did well," he said quietly, just for her. Jasmine's heart swelled with pride. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Dominic's gaze softened for a moment. "I know you are," he said, his tone warm but still carrying the weight of his authority. "But remember, this isn't going to be easy. You'll face challenges, people will doubt you. But if you keep pushing forward, they won't be able to ignore you." Jasmine nodded. She had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to be the person who was ignored anymore. She was going to prove herself, not just to Dominic, but to everyone who had ever looked down on her. As they left the meeting room, Dominic turned to her once more. "You've earned my trust, Jasmine," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But now, you have to earn theirs." Jasmine's heart raced as she looked at him, a mix of determination and excitement building inside her. "I will," she said, her voice strong. "I won't let you down." And in that moment, she knew this was just the beginning. A new chapter in her life was unfolding, and she was ready to write it herself. The days that followed the meeting were a blur of preparation and pressure for Jasmine, but nothing compared to the moment when everything that had been simmering beneath the surface finally reached a breaking point. It happened late in the afternoon, after hours of intense discussions with Dominic's team. Jasmine had held her own at first, absorbing information quickly, asking sharp questions, and proving she was not the timid girl they once doubted. But as the day dragged on, exhaustion crept in. She excused herself for a moment, stepping into one of the quiet hallways of the estate to catch her breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to steady herself. The weight of expectations suddenly felt overwhelming. She had fought for this chance, yes, but she had not expected the pressure to come crashing down so quickly. The voices of the people behind the closed door echoed in her mind. The doubts, the skepticism, the barely concealed irritation from those who thought she had been given too much too soon. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. She had survived humiliation before. She had survived years of being invisible. But this was different. This was the first time in her life she had something to lose. That fear, the fear of failing after being given a chance she had never dreamed of, was what finally pushed her to the edge. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes as a tear slipped down her cheek. She hated crying. She hated feeling weak. But the truth was impossible to deny. She felt like she was drowning. And then, just as she wiped her tears away, she heard voices nearby. She recognized them instantly, two members of Dominic's inner circle. Their footsteps echoed through the hallway, and Jasmine instinctively stepped deeper into the shadows, not wanting anyone to see her this vulnerable. Dominic made a mistake, one of them said, his tone low and frustrated. She is not ready for any of this. Jasmine's breath caught. He is letting his emotions get in the way, the other replied. Everyone saw what happened at the restaurant. He reacted. Now he is trying to justify it by giving her responsibilities she cannot handle. Jasmine felt something inside her crack. Their words pierced through every layer of confidence she had tried so hard to build. Another voice joined them, a name she recognized as Marcus, one of Dominic's closest advisors. We need to tell him the truth, Marcus said firmly. She is slowing everything down. She asks too many questions. She hesitates. She second-guesses herself. This project is too important to be put in the hands of someone like her. Someone like her. The word stung. Sharp and cruel. The same word she had heard her entire life. She did not wait for the rest of the conversation. She could not. The voices drifted away as the men continued walking, unaware that their careless words had shattered the fragile layer of confidence Jasmine had been clinging to. Jasmine slipped out of the hallway, her movements silent but fueled by panic. She made her way to the garden behind the estate, where the soft evening breeze brushed against her skin. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and pink, beautiful and calm, but Jasmine could barely see it. Her breath trembled as she sank onto a bench, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Everything Dominic had given her suddenly felt heavier, not brighter. The mansion, the meetings, the expectations, all of it pressed down on her until she felt like she might break. She tried to steady herself, but the tears came anyway, silent at first, then unstoppable. For the first time since entering Dominic's world, she allowed herself to feel how scared she truly was. She felt small again, invisible again, like the girl who had stood helpless while a plate of food was thrown at her in front of strangers. She did not hear the footsteps behind her until they were close. She did not realize someone had been watching her until a deep, steady voice broke through the silence. Jasmine. Her breath froze. She turned slowly, and there he was. Dominic Romano stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his posture still and commanding, the fading sunlight casting sharp angles across his face. His eyes were on her, and in that quiet, suspended moment, Jasmine felt the world stop around them. She knew he had seen her vulnerability. The question was what he would do now, because this was her breaking point. And now Dominic would see whether she rose or whether she crumbled. Dominic stood there for a long moment, his presence filling the space between them, unwavering. Jasmine remained frozen, her hands clutching the edge of the bench, her heart still racing from the intensity of the conversation she had just overheard. She had felt small just moments ago, invisible, but now, under Dominic's gaze, she felt exposed, her vulnerabilities laid bare. She couldn't hide anymore. But the way he stood there, silent, made her want to crawl back into the shadows. Dominic finally spoke, his voice low but firm. You're stronger than this, Jasmine. I've seen it. The words hit her like a wave. He had been watching her struggle. His eyes weren't filled with disappointment, though. No, they were understanding. You think you're not good enough, don't you? He asked, his gaze unwavering as he stepped closer. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. It was as if he had read her thoughts, heard the doubts swirling in her mind. She didn't want to admit it, but she nodded, her eyes dropping to the ground. Dominic gently lifted her chin with his finger, making her look at him. I didn't bring you here to watch you fail, he said, his voice steady, like a promise. I brought you here because I believe you can do more than you've ever imagined. You're not the person they think you are. Jasmine swallowed hard. His words had always held power over her, but now, they felt like something else, a lifeline. She was so close to sinking into the same self-doubt that had held her back for years, but Dominic's words pulled her out of it. She couldn't afford to lose this chance. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't mean to doubt myself. She trailed off. not sure how to explain the fear that had gripped her heart. "You're human," Dominic interrupted, his voice softening just enough to show his understanding. "It's natural to doubt, especially when the world around you is telling you that you don't belong. But you do, Jasmine. You belong here, more than anyone else." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. The man who had given her everything, this opportunity, this life, believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine felt the weight of that belief, like a mantle she wasn't sure she could carry. But she had to try. "I'm not going to let them down," she said, her voice more confident now. "I won't." Dominic smiled, the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. "That's the spirit. But don't forget, this is just the beginning. I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. There will be challenges. There will be times when people won't believe in you. But you have to keep pushing. You have to rise above it all. Because in the end, it's not about what they think of you. It's about what you know you can do." Jasmine nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. She had spent so long letting the opinions of others define her. It was time to stop. It was time to define herself. Dominic stepped back slightly, still watching her, assessing her in a way that was both reassuring and intimidating. "The people at the table, the ones who doubted you, don't worry about them. They're looking for weakness, and they'll find none in you if you stand tall." Jasmine's heart swelled with determination. She had been underestimated her entire life. People had written her off, told her she didn't belong. But Dominic had seen something in her that no one else had. He had given her a chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. "I'll prove it to them," she said, her voice firm now, stronger than before. Dominic smiled again, but this time, it was a warmer, more genuine expression. "I know you will, and you'll do it on your own terms. Don't let anyone make you feel small again. You're not that person." Jasmine felt a surge of energy inside her, a fire she hadn't known existed before. This was her moment. No more self-doubt. No more listening to the voices that told her she wasn't good enough. She was ready to take control of her life. As the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the garden, Dominic turned and walked toward the house, his confident stride making it clear that he expected nothing less than success. Jasmine watched him for a moment, then stood up, her mind made up. She was done being the person who doubted herself. It was time to show the world who she really was. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a girl who had been humiliated. She was someone who could rise above it all and make her own future. Jasmine took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She wasn't just going to survive in this world. She was going to thrive in it. And with Dominic's belief in her, she knew she had the strength to do it. The next few weeks felt like a blur for Jasmine. The whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and negotiations with Dominic's team had pushed her to her limits. Every day felt like a test, but it was one she was determined to pass. She had never been more focused in her life. She had entered this world with doubts, yes, but now she was beginning to find her place. The long hours and the pressure were still overwhelming at times, but she no longer felt small. Dominic's unwavering belief in her kept her grounded. He had made it clear, this wasn't just about proving herself to him. It was about proving to herself that she could handle whatever this new life threw her way. One evening, as the sun set behind the estate, Jasmine sat at her desk, reviewing the figures for a new project Dominic had tasked her with. The numbers seemed to blur together, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She knew this was her moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes to ease the tension, she heard a knock at the door. It was Dominic. He stepped in, his presence always commanding. "You're working late," he remarked, his tone neither approving nor disapproving. "I need to make sure everything is perfect," Jasmine said, glancing up from the papers. "You've been doing fine," he said, his eyes softening just slightly. "I didn't bring you here to drown in work, Jasmine. You're doing great. But remember, you can't do everything alone." Her chest tightened at his words. She had never been good at asking for help. It felt like a sign of weakness, but Dominic had always been different. He had always made it clear that he wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a chance to change, to grow. And that meant trusting others, trusting him. "I appreciate it," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "I just want to do well. For you, for everyone. I don't want to disappoint anyone." Dominic gave her a small, knowing smile. "You won't disappoint anyone. Not me, not yourself. But sometimes, you need to step back and see how far you've come. You're not the same person you were when I met you. His words resonated deep within her. It had been so easy to forget how far she had come, to get lost in the pressure and the fear of failure. But Dominic was right. She was different now. She wasn't that girl who had been humiliated at the restaurant. She wasn't the one who had spent her whole life fighting just to be seen. She was someone who had earned her place here, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small again. Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts again. You've earned this position, Jasmine, and you've earned my respect. But now, you need to stop doubting yourself. It's time to stop proving yourself to others. Start proving to yourself what you're capable of. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, but it wasn't a burden. It was an invitation, one to embrace the person she had become and step into the future she had always dreamed of. Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off her shoulders. I will, she said firmly, the decision made. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. She was going to rise to the occasion. Dominic gave her a nod of approval before turning to leave. Good, he said. I'm proud of you. As he left, Jasmine sat there for a long moment, the quiet of the estate surrounding her. She realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward something, toward a future that was hers to build. The days that had once felt like an endless struggle now felt like the foundation of something greater. She wasn't just an employee in Dominic's world. She was part of it, and she would prove to everyone, starting with herself, that she belonged here. The next day, she walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer the outsider who had been thrust into a new life. She was someone who had earned her place at that table, someone who was ready to lead. The project that had once seemed like an impossible task now felt like the first step towards something even bigger. She was ready to take the reins. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her she didn't belong. She was going to make sure the world knew her name, and more importantly, knew her worth. And with Dominic by her side, she knew she had the support to make it happen. She was no longer invisible. She was visible, powerful, and ready to take on whatever came next. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Jasmine. She had thrown herself into her work with a renewed sense of purpose, focused on the new project Dominic had entrusted to her. She was determined to prove not just to him, but to herself, that she belonged in this world. It was challenging, no doubt. There were moments of doubt, days when the pressure seemed unbearable, but each time, she reminded herself of Dominic's words. You've earned this. It was enough to keep her going. As the project progressed, Jasmine found herself growing more comfortable in her role. The team, though still wary of her at times, started to see her potential. Her ideas were sharp, her decisions clear, and she quickly gained respect for the way she handled herself in high-pressure situations. Dominic, ever watchful, began to step back, allowing her to take the lead more often. It was a subtle shift, but Jasmine could feel it. He trusted her. He was giving her the space to prove herself. One afternoon, after another grueling meeting, Jasmine found herself alone in the office, reviewing the latest proposal. The room was quiet, and the soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. She leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. The view was breathtaking, but it felt distant to her. She wasn't just a part of this world anymore. She was shaping it. And for the first time, Jasmine felt a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging. But just as she allowed herself a moment of reflection, the door opened. Dominic stepped in, looking as composed as ever, but there was something different in his expression. There was no smile, no usual calm demeanor. Instead, he looked concerned. Jasmine straightened in her seat. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. Dominic closed the door behind him, his gaze never leaving her. We need to talk, he said, his voice quiet but serious. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. What's wrong? He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of alarm. It's about the project, he said slowly. There's someone trying to undermine it. Someone within our circle. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. Who? She asked, her mind racing. Dominic paused, his jaw tightening. I'm not sure yet, but I need you to be on guard. There are things going on behind the scenes, things you might not be aware of. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had known this world wasn't all shiny and perfect, but to hear it from Dominic, someone she had come to trust, made it feel all the more real. I can handle it, Jasmine said, her voice more confident than she felt. Dominic studied her for a moment, and for the first time, she saw a hint of something softer in his eyes, maybe even pride. I know you can, but I need you to be cautious. There are people who won't like what you're doing, and they won't hesitate to try and stop you. Jasmine nodded, determination setting in. I won't let them. I'm not afraid of anyone trying to stop me. I'll deal with it. Dominic's expression softened ever so slightly. Good. But remember, you're not alone in this. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask. The words were simple, but they meant everything. Dominic wasn't just giving her power. He was giving her the reassurance that she wasn't alone. She had allies. She had him. And with that, she knew she could face whatever came next. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice steady. I won't let you down. He gave a brief nod. I know you won't. As Dominic left, closing the door behind him, Jasmine sat in the stillness of the room, her thoughts racing. She had come so far, but she had no illusions about how much was still at stake. The game had changed, but the rules had too. She couldn't afford to be naive anymore. There were people in this world who would stop at nothing to take what they wanted, and Jasmine had learned firsthand how quickly someone could be written off, dismissed, discarded. She wasn't going to be one of those people. She wasn't going to be overlooked or taken advantage of. She was going to fight for her place, and she would make sure no one could ever make her feel small again. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but Jasmine's mind was already racing ahead. She had a plan, and it was time to put it into action. The future was waiting, and she was going to take it by storm. No more playing small. No more letting others decide her worth. It was time for Jasmine to take control, to show the world exactly who she was. And when they saw her, they would know. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. The morning after Dominic's warning arrived heavy with tension. Jasmine woke early, long before the sun had fully risen. The sky outside her window was a muted gray, the kind that promised change. She stood silently at the edge of her room, staring out over the estate grounds. Every detail of Dominic's words from the night before replayed in her mind. Someone was trying to sabotage the project. Someone inside the circle. Someone who knew enough to strike where it would hurt the most. Jasmine felt a fire building inside her. She had fought too hard to let anyone tear down what she had built. She would not let fear creep back into her life. She would not allow anyone to make her feel helpless again. Not now. Not after everything she had survived. After getting dressed, she walked down the long marble hallway toward the conference room. Each step echoed with purpose. She was no longer the woman who hesitated. She was no longer the woman who doubted her own worth. Today, she would confront this problem head-on. When she entered the room, Dominic was already there, standing at the head of the table. His expression was serious, intent, a far cry from the quiet pride he often allowed himself to show around her. He looked up as she entered, eyes meeting hers with a question and a challenge. She answered with a steady nod. She was ready. A moment later, the rest of the team filed in. The men who had once dismissed her, the advisors who had doubted her, the voices she had overheard whispering in the hallway, trying to plant seeds of insecurity in her mind. But when Jasmine entered, their murmurs quieted. Something in her posture made them straighten. She no longer looked like the unsure newcomer. She carried herself with intention, with a confidence that demanded attention. Dominic waited until everyone had taken their seats before he spoke. There is a problem inside this team, he said, his voice calm but powerful. Someone has been undermining the project. And it ends today. The room shifted uneasily. Jasmine felt the tension rise like a wave. Dominic continued. I have trusted every person in this room. I have believed in all of you. But someone has chosen to betray that trust. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he looked toward Jasmine. Jasmine has been leading this project with integrity, effort, and more dedication than most of you have shown. And yet someone here has been feeding false information into the numbers, trying to sabotage the launch. A ripple of shock moved across the room. Some glanced at Jasmine with unease. Others frowned in confusion. But one man, Marcus, kept his gaze carefully down, unmoving. Jasmine noticed immediately. She had learned to read people. Marcus was controlled, too controlled. Dominic stepped aside, giving Jasmine the floor. She felt her heart drum a heavy rhythm in her chest, but she steadied herself. This was not the moment to hesitate. I know some of you think I was given this position because Dominic felt sorry for me, she said, her voice clear, unwavering. I know some of you believed I would fail, and maybe a part of me feared that too. She let her gaze sweep slowly across the table, not skipping a single face. But I have worked for everything I have achieved here. I have spent every hour learning what I needed to learn, and I will not let anyone destroy what we have built. A deep silence filled the room. Dominic watched her, unreadable but focused. Jasmine continued. The false reports were traced. The altered files came from a single workstation. Her voice tightened. Marcus's. The room froze. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes wide with feigned indignation. That is absurd, he said, but his voice wavered. I would never. You already did. Jasmine cut in, her tone sharp and steady. You thought I would never check. You thought I would never question you. You were wrong. She stepped closer to the table, her hands pressed firmly against the polished surface. You did not want me here. You tried to make me fail before I had a chance to prove myself. But you underestimated me. Marcus opened his mouth again, but Dominic raised a hand, silencing him instantly. The authority in that gesture was absolute. Dominic's voice dropped, cold and final. You have betrayed this team, and you have betrayed me. Marcus paled. There was no more room to argue. Dominic turned toward Jasmine, and in that moment, the entire room saw what he saw in her. Strength, intelligence, grace under fire. Jasmine, Dominic said quietly, you have done exactly what I hoped you would do. The room went still again, tension thick enough to press against skin. Jasmine straightened, her voice firm. I am not here because I was rescued. I am here because I earned it. And that day, everyone in that room understood exactly who Jasmine had become. The days following the confrontation with Marcus were a turning point for Jasmine. She had won that battle, exposed the betrayal, proven her worth, but the war wasn't over. The tension in the air was palpable as she navigated through the office, aware that some eyes followed her with admiration, while others carried a hint of doubt. But Jasmine had stopped caring about their judgment. She had learned that her strength didn't come from the approval of others. It came from within. Dominic, however, was more present than ever, a constant source of support and guidance. He made sure to check in with her after every meeting, offering words of encouragement and occasional advice. As the team adjusted to the revelation, Jasmine found herself becoming more of a force within the company. Her ideas were no longer questioned, and her decisions were respected. She was running the project with the kind of determination Dominic had always known she had, and the results spoke for themselves. But even as things began to shift in her favor, Jasmine knew that there were still those who would try to test her resolve, and she wasn't going to back down. One evening, after a long day of strategy sessions, Jasmine sat in her office, looking over the final proposal for the project. The numbers aligned, the plan was solid, and all that was left was to present it. Her fingers drummed against the desk as she stared at the document. Everything had led to this moment, the culmination of months of work, the hours of sleepless nights, the doubt she had pushed through. She was ready. But just as she was about to make her way to Dominic's office to present the plan, the door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something unreadable. His eyes met hers, but there was no anger, no apology, just a silent understanding between them. You've done well, Marcus said, his voice low. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, wondering what game he was playing this time. I'm not here to cause trouble, he continued, stepping into the room. I've seen what you can do. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone's got what it takes. And you've got it. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, not completely trusting his words, but willing to hear him out. Why the change of heart? She asked, her tone steady. Marcus paused, as if choosing his words carefully. I was wrong about you, he admitted. I saw you as an obstacle. I didn't think you belonged here. But now I see it. You've earned your place, Jasmine, not because of anyone else, but because of your own strength. Jasmine didn't know what to make of his confession. For months, Marcus had undermined her at every turn, questioning her abilities, doubting her decisions. And now, here he was, acknowledging her talent. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him yet, but she could respect his honesty. I don't need your approval, she said simply, her voice calm but firm. I've learned to trust myself, and that's all I need. Marcus nodded, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Fair enough, he said. I'll be watching. I've got no intention of getting in your way again. You've got my respect now." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Jasmine to process his words. She couldn't deny that hearing them felt like a victory, but she also knew that she didn't need validation from anyone, especially not from someone who had tried to tear her down. What mattered now was the future, and that future was hers to shape. The next morning, Dominic arrived early, as always, his presence a steadying force in her world. When he walked into her office, he didn't need to say much. His look told her everything she needed to know. He had been watching. He had seen the shift, the change in the dynamic of the team, the growing respect for Jasmine. "You've done it," he said, his voice low and approving. "You've earned it." Jasmine met his gaze, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not done yet," she replied, the determination in her voice unmistakable. "This is just the beginning." Dominic's smile was small, but filled with pride. "I never doubted you." And in that moment, Jasmine realized that she had come a long way. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't just someone trying to prove herself. She had become someone others respected, someone who was in control of her own future. As the project moved forward and the team rallied behind her, Jasmine knew that she had found her place, not because of Dominic, but because of herself. She was no longer the woman who had been humiliated at the restaurant. She wasn't the person who had been dismissed by others. She was someone who had worked hard for everything she had achieved, and now, she was unstoppable. The world was hers to take, and Jasmine was ready to do just that. The days following Jasmine's victory over Marcus were a blur of meetings, new challenges, and the steady march of progress on her project. She was no longer the outsider, the one who had been doubted and dismissed. She had become an integral part of the team, trusted by Dominic and respected by her colleagues. The project, once threatened by internal sabotage, was now moving forward at full speed. Jasmine's leadership had been undeniable. Yet, even as things began to look brighter, she could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the subtle shift in the room when people spoke of her. She was no longer just Dominic's protégé. She was a force in her own right. One evening, as she sat in her office, reviewing the final draft of the project's presentation, a thought crossed her mind. This was it. This was the moment. The team, the effort, everything she had worked for had led her here. But there was one final piece she needed to conquer, her own doubts. Despite everything, there was still a part of her that feared the judgment of others. The fear that, despite all her success, it could all be taken away in an instant. It was a fear that had followed her for as long as she could remember, the fear of being nothing more than a shadow. But tonight, in the silence of the office, Jasmine realized something. She wasn't running from the shadows anymore. She had created her own light. The soft knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. She looked up to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual calm expression softening as his gaze met hers. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "How's everything going?" he asked, his tone casual but with a hint of curiosity. Jasmine set down the paper she had been reviewing and leaned back in her chair, meeting his gaze. "Everything's on track. The team's finally behind me. The project's ready to launch." Dominic nodded, clearly pleased with her progress. "I knew you had it in you," he said, walking over to the window and gazing out at the city below. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the years they had both endured hanging in the air. "You've come a long way," Dominic continued, his voice quieter now. "From the restaurant to here. From being looked down on to leading this team. You've proven yourself." Jasmine smiled, but it was a smile of quiet pride, not arrogance. "I didn't do it for anyone else," she said softly. "I did it for me." Dominic turned to face her, a rare warmth in his eyes. "That's exactly why you'll continue to succeed." Jasmine's chest swelled with a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not the person I used to be, and I'm not going back." Dominic gave her a small nod, acknowledging her resolve. "Good. You're exactly where you need to be." They stood there for a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Dominic wasn't just her employer anymore. He was the one who had given her the chance to show who she truly was. He was the one who had believed in her when no one else had. But now, Jasmine realized, she no longer needed his validation. She had found her own confidence, her own strength. The world was no longer something she had to navigate carefully, tiptoeing around her insecurities. It was something she could take by storm. The launch presentation the following week was a turning point. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, addressing the board, the investors, the team. Her hands were steady, her voice unwavering as she presented the final plans for the project. She felt the eyes of the room on her, but it didn't faze her. She knew what she was doing. She knew she had earned this moment. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. The investors were impressed. The team rallied behind her. Dominic's approving look across the room was all the validation she needed. But for Jasmine, the true reward came from within. She had done it. She had proven herself. No longer the woman who had been humiliated in front of strangers. No longer the one who had fought for recognition. She was a leader, standing tall and proud of what she had built. As she walked out of the meeting room, her head held high. She realized that this was just the beginning. She was ready to lead, to take on whatever came next. She was no longer fighting for a place in this world. She had claimed it as her own. The future was hers to shape, and Jasmine was determined to make it one that no one would ever forget.